Margaret Chen had always prided herself on building bridges, in business, that is. As the CEO of one of the country's leading construction companies, she knew how to connect people, projects, and possibilities. But on this rainy Thursday afternoon, sitting in her wheelchair beside a small cafe table with a birthday cake growing cold, she wondered if she'd forgotten how to build the bridges that mattered most. The cake was beautiful. Vanilla with buttercream frosting, decorated with 28 colorful candles that flickered hopefully in the cafe's warm light. Her daughter Sarah had requested something simple this year. At 28, Sarah had learned to appreciate life's quieter moments, especially since the accident 3 years ago that had left her paralyzed from the waist down. Margaret glanced at her daughter, whose long auburn hair caught the afternoon light streaming through the rain-streaked windows. Sarah wore a soft pink sweater that complemented her gentle features, and despite everything they'd been through, her daughter's smile still held the same warmth it had when she was 5 years old. "Mom, it's okay," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying that familiar note of acceptance that both broke Margaret's heart and filled it with pride. Really, sometimes the best parties are the small ones. But Margaret knew better. She'd sent invitations to Sarah's college friends, her former colleagues from the marketing firm where she'd worked before the accident, even some family members. Everyone had their reasons: prior commitments, work obligations, the usual polite excuses that people offered when life became uncomfortable. The cafe hummed with its usual afternoon activity. Steam rose from coffee cups, conversations flowed at nearby tables, and the barista called out names for pickup orders. It was the kind of place Sarah had always loved: cozy, unpretentious, with exposed brick walls and mismatched furniture that somehow felt perfectly right together. Margaret was about to suggest they head home when she noticed someone approaching their table. A man in his early 40s, wearing a blue flannel shirt and jeans, walked over with gentle confidence. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and he had kind eyes that seemed to take in the situation without judgment. Behind him, a young boy of perhaps 7 or 8 followed, his blonde hair neatly combed and his curious eyes bright with interest. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice warm and respectful. "I'm David, and this is my son Tommy. We couldn't help but notice—" He paused, gesturing toward the cake with its cheerful candles. "It looks like someone's having a birthday." Sarah looked up, surprised but not uncomfortable. "Yes, it's mine, actually." Tommy stepped forward with the earnest enthusiasm that only children possess. "Are you having a party? It looks like a really nice cake." There was something about the boy's simple, genuine interest that seemed to light up the space around their table. David placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder, not to restrain him, but to anchor him with love and guidance. "We were just finishing our hot chocolate," David continued, "but if you wouldn't mind the company, well, birthdays seem too important to celebrate alone." Margaret felt something shift in her chest. Here was a stranger, a single father by the looks of it, offering what friends and family had not: simple human connection without conditions or complications. "Can we join you?" David asked, his question directed to both women, but somehow understanding that this decision belonged to them entirely. Sarah's face transformed. The polite resignation that had settled there like dust was suddenly swept away by genuine surprise and pleasure. Yes, we'd love that." And so 2 strangers became birthday guests. David and Tommy pulled up chairs, and suddenly the small table felt complete rather than empty. Tommy chattered easily about school and his favorite subjects, while David listened with the patient attention of someone who understood that every moment with his child was precious. "I teach at the elementary school down the street," David explained to Margaret during a brief lull in Tommy's enthusiastic storytelling. "Lost my wife 2 years ago to cancer. It's just been the 2 of us since then." Margaret nodded, recognizing In David's matter-of-fact tone, the same quiet strength she'd heard in Sarah's voice moments earlier. Life had tested them both, but rather than making them bitter, it had taught them to appreciate simple kindnesses. As they sang Happy Birthday, together, their voices creating a small choir in the busy cafe, Margaret watched her daughter's face glow with genuine happiness. The candles reflected in Sarah's eyes, and when she made her wish and blew them out, Margaret found herself believing in wishes again. Tommy clapped enthusiastically, and David smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had chosen kindness and found it returned tenfold. They shared the cake, which tasted better somehow when divided among new friends rather than eaten in sympathetic solitude. "You know," Sarah said as they finished the last crumbs, "this turned out to be exactly the kind of birthday I needed." David raised his coffee cup in a small toast. "Here's to unexpected celebrations and the courage to accept kindness from strangers. And to teaching our children," Margaret added, looking at Tommy's bright, accepting face, "that differences are just another way of being human." As the rain continued to fall outside the cafe windows, 4 people who had been strangers an hour earlier sat together in the warm light, connected by nothing more complicated than human decency and the simple recognition that everyone deserves to be celebrated. Sometimes, Margaret reflected, the most important bridges aren't built with steel and concrete, but with open hearts and the willingness to say, "Can we join you?" When they finally prepared to leave, David wrote his phone number on a napkin. "Tommy and I would love to take you both out for dinner sometime, as friends." Sarah accepted the napkin with a smile that lit up her entire face. "We'd like that very much." And as they went their separate ways into the rainy afternoon, Margaret realized that her daughter's birthday wish had already come true. Sometimes the best gifts come, not from those who are supposed to care, but from those who simply choose to. The end.